Okay, so we missed a week, so we have to take just a step back so we can go forward. We're on Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. And so I'm just going to orally recount a little bit of the discussion and then we'll pick it up.
You could just
So,
tilt your camera just a little bit and your chin's cut off.
this way?
There you go.
There you
Now
go.
down a little, down. Perfect.
Down?
There you go. Good.
That's perfect.
Okay. So in the middle of the daf on Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, we said that there is, first of all, a machlokes between Rav and Rav Yanai. What is that machlokes? The machlokes is whether you can do a future contract and exchange produce for money. In other words, the contract is for produce, but at some point later, when it comes to be sort of fulfilled, then you can pay money. Rob says you can't because that looks like ribbis. Whether it is or isn't, but it really does look like ribbis because all of a sudden, remember, in ribbis, when you have produce, you kind of don't get a clear, I mean, it's there, but it's not as clear as when you give money. Money is really the source of what creates ribbis for the most part. So Rob says you can't do it. Rav Yanai says, Mali hain, Mali demand. What is the difference? If you're going to exchange it for a product, whatever it is, then money is fungible just like a product. So philosophically, there's a machlokes whether or not money can be introduced into a transaction that didn't start out that way. That's the machlokes between Rav and Rav Yana. Okay, so all right, we understand that. So then the Gemara came back and asked a question that Rav is out of tune. Why is Rav out of tune? Because remember, we had previously a brisa from Rav Oshia, and Rav Oshia's brisa involved trading of product to product to product. He went from wheat to wine, from wine to shemen, and each time the rise in price was included in the subsequent transaction. It was all product, but it kept moving it along, moving it along, moving it along. So based on that brisa, we're saying it can't come out according to Rav. Because when Rav says you can't introduce money, he's actually saying you can't introduce anything other than that original product. Doesn't mean just money. He says if you're trading in wheat, then the contract has to be in wheat. If it's in oil, it has to be in oil. So you can't transact from one to the other, and certainly you can't transact into money. But the truth of the matter is, in Rav Oshia's brisa, remember the Tuvia rose in price. So he said, all right, it was worth $10, now it's worth $12. So give me $12. But I want to buy wine. So he said to him, okay, I have wine for $12. So there's a little bit of a fine line between the $12 cash and the $12 wine. And Rav Oshia said, you can do that. According to Rav, you can't do that because now you're introducing something different than what you started before, even though it might be a product and not cash. That gives rise to the potential for ribbis. So Rav is very makbid that ribbis being so severe, and we see how severe it is from our Gemara, you can't do anything that might raise the specter of ribbis because you can overlap in the Torah. And remember, we said there's no tshuva according to some other. So we're skating on thin ice. Therefore, we say don't do it. But l'chayra from Rav Oshia's brisa, which we hold of, how does Rav comport with that? According to Rav, you can't do any of that. So we gave two answers, if you remember. The first answer, again, the Gemara is trying to figure out a way to make Rav whole. So Rav Huna says in the name of Rav, you know what? We were talking about Meshicha. What does that mean? That he made a kinyan at the time that he made the transaction. Meshicha meaning pushing, pulling, or lifting, whatever. In other words, some physical act other than just handing over money. And that makes it a conclusive deal. Now it's no longer a cash on Rav, because whatever happens after that belongs to the fellow, and he's not taking ribbis because he's already owns it. So clear ownership obviates the problem of ribbis. So that was one way that the Gemara wanted to say that Rav could fit into the Rav Oshia's price, which you hold on. And so the Gemara asked, what do you mean, Mashiach? Of course, Mashiach. Mashiach is the best thing in the world. The Gemara can't be talking about Mashiach. It's too obvious. There's got to be something else that the Gemara wants to tell us other than the most obvious thing. So we concluded that what the Gemara is telling us is, no, he didn't do Mashiach, but he did something close to Mashiach. What's that? Called Karen Zavius, where the buyer cleared out an entire corner, with the seller rather cleared out an entire corner, put the stuff into the corner. It became clearly his, although he didn't have title of ownership. And therefore, Rav would admit that in that case, you can trade one commodity for another commodity or cash because there's no mistaking that it's ribbis. It's clearly his because it's in that corner, even though there's no Mashiach or no Kenyan that he owns it. So that's the way we reconcile the Rav. And now we say Rav can hold like the Rosh's price. Okay, good to go. Then the Gemara said, I'm going to give you an alternative look at how Rav can fit in here, other than what we just said. And then Shmuel comes along and he says, you know what? The way Rav can fit in is because there is another machlekes, an interesting machlekes. The question is, what does Rabbi Oshia say? Rabbi Oshia is saying that you can continue to transact from one to the other, and we're not worried about ribbis. And Rav would say, I am worried about ribbis. So according to the first interpretation, we're not worried because it clearly is his. Shmuel comes along and says, you know what? You know why we're not worried about ribbis? Because that brisa holds like Rabbi Yehuda. So who's Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda is the one who introduced a novel approach that when you transact with someone else, if you transact, I'm giving you wheat, you got to give me back wheat, there's no wiggle room. Okay, there you have to have clear indication that you paid the market value, right? And then we say if you pay the market value or yeshlo, then you're okay. Otherwise, it would appear to be ribbis. Comes Rabbi Yehuda and says that when you do a transaction, and there are two ways for that transaction to end, okay? In other words, if I take the wheat alone, fine, I'll take the wheat alone. But if I don't take the wheat and I take a different commodity, I'm allowed to do that, even though it may appear to be ribbis, but I'm allowed to do it. So Rabbi Yehuda's chiddush is, you can't have ribbis when you have options to purchase, and one of those options looks like ribbis and one doesn't look like ribbis. So that's a whole novel theory, because again, what Rabbi Yehuda is trying to say is that ribbis being such a severe situation, it has to be absolute. Well, it has to be absolute. There has to be an absolute condition that requires ribbis. If there's a possibility that you transact and it's not ribbis, then even if you do the ribbis portion, it's not ribbis. That's a big finish. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's theory, and therefore he says that in Moshe's brisa, by continuing to change from one to the other, even though there may be an element of ribbis in the fact that you're going to have a better deal if you get the shemen, if you get the ayin, but you're allowed to substitute for the ribbits if it isn't absolutely clear in the document as to what you're getting back. So that's a big chiddush. So based on that chiddush in Rabbi Yoshi's brisa, he wants to interpret Rav and say that, Rav can hold like Rav Oshia, because Rav Oshia is only talking about when there are options of a ribbis situation or a non-ribbis situation. Therefore, we say there's no ribbis because there's a possibility of not being ribbis. Rav is talking about a strict ribis situation. So there's no comparison, and Rav doesn't have to identify specifically with Rav Oshia, because Rav Oshia is talking about a different thing, because he interprets his brisa like Rabbi Yehuda. So that's a big chiddush. Rabbi Yehuda is telling us that when there are options to be a ribis result and a non-ribis result, we don't say the ribis result is an isser and the non-ribis is not an isser. We say the whole thing is not an isser because you have choices. So that's the chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore Shmuel wants to say Rav is not in conflict with the brisa, so it can come out like brisa. Okay.
Rabbi, could you
Yeah, go
clarify?
ahead.
Could you clarify? So I don't understand why we have to go through all
I,
this.
yeah, Michael, I don't know if it's my computer or yours, but I need a little bit more volume.
Okay,
Much
is
better.
that better? Okay,
Much better.
I need to be closer to the mic. Sorry. Okay, so why do we need all this? We're allowed to trade commodity for commodity, and the transactions are different. So if I want to trade up and the market has changed since I first acquired, and the value of what I initially received under the loan transaction has moved up, why am I not allowed to trade for the current value of another commodity in that transaction? Why do I need to go through all these rigors? Because you know, the um the issue of not, I mean, we talked before about Morris Iron, I mean, having a great deal, and you just indicated that if money is not involved in the transaction, there's much less likelihood that there's ribis. So why do we have to go through all these, dancing around the head of a pin, and can't say we're just trading one commodity for another and they're separate transactions, and I can trade borrowed goods for other goods, and trade up, and that transaction is not part of the first transaction. So why do we have to do all this?
Well, I think the issue is this. If I did a transaction with you, and that was a standalone transaction, and then I did a transaction with Menashe, and that was a standalone transaction, there's no possible way to connect the two. Therefore, we're not looking for any issue. Ribis, we're not looking for anything. Once I transact with you, and then there is a subsequent transaction with you, we are now, so to speak, climbing the ladder, and we're saying that to someone who looks at the deal and analyzes it, I paid you $100 for a shipment of wheat, and when I loaned the $100, and when it comes time to repay, since the wheat had gone up in price, so Rav says if you're dealing strictly with wheat and you made that agreement on wheat, it's okay. But once you deviate from the deal that you made at the very outset, and you said, you know what, instead of wheat, I'll give you cash, or instead of wheat, I'll give you wine, then according to Rav, it has the appearance of ribis because the value of the wheat increased. If the value of the wheat increased and our deal was in wheat, and we established that there was a price for wheat, okay, no problem, no ribis, no nothing, we accomplished everything beforehand. But if you establish beforehand and wheat, says Rav, it's not conclusive that that covered future increases in cash or other product. Therein lies falls the problem of ribis. Because if you're going to transact in something different than wheat, remember, wheat had the established price, wine didn't, or cash. So now that you're going to turn it over, and you're turning it over with something different than wheat. Remember, wheat is now exempt because there was an established price and yeshlo or whatever, so there's no inyan. But once you deviate, says Rav, and that's therein of the machlokes. According to Rav, once you deviate from your initial purchase, you open yourself up to ribis, because if the price in fact did go up because tefillah became more expensive, and then you bought, let's say, yayin, a grape yayin, then you've made a profit, and that profit appears to be ribbis. Go
But
ahead.
wait a second. So, if I'm a merchant, if we have two merchants who deal in multiple types of goods,
Right.
and the first transaction, if I recall, was not a sale, but a loan.
Alone.
Okay.
Alone.
So that is the transaction, and I'm obligated to pay it back. If I'm two merchants and I borrow this because I don't have it right now, and then we decide in a different commodity that we both or one of us deals in, that we make the trade of this to get that other commodity because I want the other commodity. No money has changed hands. Why is that considered ribbis? Because all we've done is traded one commodity for another. And if the value that's a separate transaction, that the negotiation has changed because in the 2 weeks since I acquired the wheat, the price of wheat has gone up. So it's a separate transaction. Let's say it's documented as a separate transaction than the loan. Why is it linked to the original transaction?
And that's there. Yes, and that's exactly what Rav Yanai says. So what you now articulated is Rav Yanai's position. Mali hain, mali demehen. What difference does it make? 100%. The reason why Rav disagrees is because Rav is much more firm, is much more machmir, that anything that deviates from what you originally did is no good. Anything that deviates from the original deal, so that someone sees wheat for wheat, shemen for shemen, anything other than that gives rise to the question of ribbis, because you are negotiating, in this case, the future contract to get back more than what you bargained for. If you bargained for Tvua and got back Tvua that was worth more, Rob wouldn't have a problem, because that's what you bargained for, and there was an established price. But the established price, according to Rob, is only good when you're dealing in the same commodity. If you're dealing in cash or a different commodity, then the principle that we've established that a fixed price negates ribbis doesn't apply. That's Rob's position.
But he's one opinion. That's not the majority.
One opinion, right? This is the machlokes between Rob and Rabbi Yanai. You're 100% right. It's not the that last word. It's Rob's opinion. But the problem was that we had a brisa that everybody agreed to, and Rob, how does Rob fit into that brisa? Because the brisa seems to support Rabbi Yanai and not Rob. That was the question. Rob is entitled to his opinion. But wait a minute, there's a brisa, and Rob and Rob came after. How could he argue with the brisa? Remember, the Amoraim came after the Tanoim, and all the Mishnah and the brises were established, and now came the Amoraim, and they started trying to understand the Mishnah and the brisa. So if he's coming back and he's trying to understand the brisa, but he can't come back and negate the brisa, he can't say, Rav Oshia, you're wrong. You can't do that because I hold that you can only transact in Tvua. So how can you say in your brisa you can do it? He can't do that. He's got to find a way to fit into Rav Oshia's position. So in the beginning, we said, you know how he fits in? We gave these examples of, there was Mashiach. It was no longer a transaction where he could be suspect because he owns it. Or Karen Zavius, which we said also.
Okay. Yeah.
So
in other words, and then Shmuel came up with Rabbi Yehuda's theory, the theory of alternate ribbis, that where it's not 100% clear that it's ribbis and it's not ribbis. These are all ways of putting a band-aid on Rob.
Yeah, and it's
saying, Rob, you fit in because we're going to give you all kinds of conditions that you're talking about, so that you're not really arguing with the brisa, but you're talking about a different situation. And that the Gemara is filled with that, where we're trying to distinguish where someone argues with a Mishnah or a brisa, and he can't. And so we say, your situation is unique. Therefore, we can say we agree with you, but in the larger picture, you have to hold like the brisa. So these are good answers as to why Rob holds like the brisa. But in this particular situation, there is a different condition, and in a different condition, Rob can say what he says. Remember, Rabbi Yanai which is the predominant position, is much more liberal because he doesn't have a problem if you established a price and then you switch commodities, you still have that established price. That's the logical answer, isn't it, Michael? The logical answer is that when you have
Well,
a
you had an
price
established price at the time, but
at the
things
time, but
change.
that's all you need. You only need a price at the time. It doesn't matter what happens later.
But-
Remember, the Kiddush was that even though something appears to be ribis, but if you transacted at a time when the number was absolute, we don't care what happens later because you already transacted on a fixed number, so it's not ribis. So,
Well,
so
but
therefore, there's many more opportunities to say that there's not ribis than that there is ribis, but Rab is very machmir.
but
So-
let's go back to Mashiach. So there's a machlokus in Baba Kama and Baba Basra about whether you if you own the produce and somebody else owns the land. So your concept of Mashiach is that I traded this commodity for certain produce, which at a certain price that I got after this first transaction, and then you say I acquired it, which is essentially what the trade is, because the loan still stands in the first place of the transaction. So that's a workaround. That is a sale. When we trade a commodity in the second transaction, it's also a sale. It's an exchange that is different than a loan. So
Right.
why doesn't Rav view that as the same as a Mashiach? You're exchanging a product for a product, a commodity for a commodity, excuse me, and then you've made a sales transaction, not a loan transaction at that point. And so there's an acquisition. So that changes the character of the original transaction. The loan is the loan. I still owe for that loan. But if I want to make this separate transaction of a sale, I can do that. And if I want to use the proceeds of that sale or that exchange to pay off my loan, and the lender is willing to
But
do that.
what are you paying off at the original price or at the new price? That's the question.
Well, I'm
If
paying
you-
off at the new price because the it's a separate transaction. The values change. We agreed on the value for what the wine is worth in exchange for the wheat, and I'm exchanging this. And well, I can do one of two things. I can say, so it's a true exchange. The transaction has consummated. The each of the commodities is now in their regular hands. And now I can say, I can either sell that to another person, or I can say to you, you want to buy this back at the current price. It has nothing to do with the original transaction because you've traded the commodity, and that is a sale that is separate from the original loan transaction.
Right. So
Why
we
does
had
Rob
that
have a problem with that?
Yeah. So we had that situation a few weeks ago in the Gemara where we had the loan and then we had a sale in the middle, and there was a profit in the sale, which is not ribis. Then we went back and we talked about, okay, but the loan is still there and I've got to repay the loan. So what am I repaying? Am I repaying at the original price? Or because now I have a commodity that is increased in value, and if I repay at an increased price, then according to Rob, not Rabbi Yanai, according to Rob, that would be ribis because
I
you
have
are
a
now
choice.
making a profit on the loan, not the sale, but on the loan.
Well, let's go back to the loan. So I can either, if this is the way the transaction is set up, I can pay with the same amount of wheat back, which so the value of the loan is at the original value.
Right.
I can trade the same amount of wheat back for what the amount was there, equivalent
And
to
Rob
that
would
of the
agree.
original
Rob would
price.
say yes. Yes.
Or I can pay back the monetary equivalent of that at the equal to the original price, because that's when the loan was. And if I have made a profit and then paid back, I'm entitled to that difference because I'm a holder in due course, and I am entitled to get that profit as a holder in due course. If I decide to trade another commodity in exchange for that you need, and this is the market value of that commodity now, and you're willing to exchange that, it's between the two transactors. So why do we have to go back to that first transaction if it's clearly not related to that? This is really looking for a problem that isn't.
Well, so everything started with the loan. Whatever there was sale, whatever happened later. Everything started with the loan. Rob looks at it very, very narrowly. If we transacted with a loan of Tuvua, and the Tuvua had a fixed price, we know what that price is. Therefore, if you give me back Tuvua, even though the Tuvua increased in value, but the fact that we had a fixed price takes it out of the realm of ribis. So Rob is very
we had
narrow.
a fixed amount of Tavua. We had a fixed amount of.
But he's giving him back the same fixed amount of Tua, except it's worth more.
But
it's
the value now may be higher. So he may be paying a premium, but as far as Rob's concerned, it takes away his concern because I paid him back in wheat. If he sold to a third party at the higher value and then paid back the original amount, nobody would worry that he made a profit.
Right.
So the issue is
but let me stop you. But what happened here was he didn't give him back the Tuvua for which there is no ribis. He said, okay, I'll give you wine. We switched horses in the middle of the race, and now we're dealing with wine, which Rob says that can be ribis. Remember,
but we have said that trading commodities, whether it's for money or another commodity, is like exchanging that transaction. It's a sale. If I'm exchanging one commodity for another, even with you, the lender, that is a separate transaction. And we can pay with multiple things. I, as the lender, don't have to accept the wine, but if I decide to accept the wine as payment at its current value, equivalent to what the loan was at, what's wrong with that?
So at the end of the day, what is the loan being repaid with? The loan, not a cash, not a sale. The loan is being repaid with what?
It should be allowed to be repaid for whatever the lender asks, whatever is in the agreement, whatever is agreed to. If it's money only, then it's money. If it is commodities or money that I will accept as consideration at the value that it was before, based on the current value of the other commodity, that should be in the agreement, and that there's nothing wrong with that because that's what the parties agreed to. There is no perception of ribis. This is extending it to a, is just a, if it's a sale transaction, nobody has a problem with it. Even if I made a profit, except for ONA, and within the limitations of ONA, I don't have a problem with saying, so if I instead of lending, I bought that and then I sold it back to you at a higher price 2 weeks later, nobody would have a problem with that.
That's correct.
Just because of the characterization as a loan, that everything is considered as, going back. This is Rob's shita, is that it's supposed to go back to the loan. And once you have a loan, nothing else you configure except the loan. But that's not commerce. Commerce is each transaction is a different transaction. If it's dependent on that, if it's contingent on that, I understand the point. But if there are separate transactions, one transaction has nothing to do with the other. So how can you say everything relates back to the original loan transaction? So it means if you lend, that's a deterrent to lending anybody anything.
Well, again, I think what you're trying to say is that there should be a clear demarcation between the original loan and the subsequent transactions, and therefore Rob should not be concerned that it's ribis because they're separate transactions.
Right. And
I think
so
that's what I hear you saying.
He still would have a concern because he links everything back to the original loan, even if it was papered as you just described.
So your situation would be absolutely correct if Rav, even though there was a separate transaction, let's say with Shemen or Yayin, and he then translated that money into Tvua, into wheat, which was the original transaction. Now he's paying less because he got more money for the wine than for the wheat. So clearly he's making a profit. But by returning the wheat, not the shemen or not the yayin, it's a wheat for wheat transaction. That, says Rav, that takes it out of the realm of ribbis. I have no problem with what the subsequent value of the tvua is, as long as it's repaying him with tvua. Then nobody can say there's ribbis here, because there was tvua in and tvua out. And
But
that,
as the lender, so I made that transaction. Then it turns out I need one, and I happen to have one. And he says, okay, I'll take your wine at the current price. And he'll say, how about we take the value, you give me wine, either in exchange for that or in excess of that or less than that, as against my loan, because I need wine at the current value. Why? So it's transacting at what a different commodity. You can pay with something other than kesef and other than wheat. Otherwise, I mean, and you could stipulate that you can only pay me back with wheat, or you can pay me back the amount in the agreement, which would solve Rav's problem, because the agreement would be stark enough that that's the only alternative you had. But if I papered the agreement to say, I accept, I'm lending this to you and you can pay me back in either A, B, or C at the value that this was for the current value, why is that ribbis? It's just making something that isn't there.
well, again, you're making a great argument for Rav Yanai, and that's exactly Rav Yanai's position, that we should encourage and have flexibility to make a transaction in something other than the original transaction and not call it ribbis. So
Rabbi, isn't it
you're perfectly on the mark when it comes to Rav Yanai, perfectly.
But isn't it the intention for people to want to lend, to people who can have, and so this is going to deter lending, because I may not want to observe those strict parameters. And so therefore I'm not going to lend unless, if this is the potential of what's going to happen and I'm at risk, potentially at risk of losing money. I'm a wheat merchant. Why would I want to lend if I have that risk?
Right. So that's a good point. But Rob says that the concern of ribbis outweighs the flexibility of lending. And you know what you need to do? You need to end the transaction on Teruah, like you said, and then start a new transaction. So in other words, it isn't sort of you're sliding from one to the other. And according to Rav, that's a problem. You're concluding one deal, totally concluding. Now we're going to make a second deal. And that second deal will be with Shemen.
What if I said in the deal, I'm lending you this, and you can pay me back with wheat, the equivalent,
and let's end the deal. Pay me with wheat and let's end the deal.
No, or shemen at the current market price, equivalent to the amount I owe you.
That's what Rob says.
Rob have a problem with that?
Rob has a problem with that, yeah. Unless you have one of the exceptions that we now talked about, whether it was Mashiach. In other words, without an ulterior argument as to why the lender shouldn't get back something he's not entitled to. He's entitled to it if he made a Mashiach and he owns it. It can go up double the price. He's entitled to it according to Rabbi Yehuda, as long as there's an alternative method of payment. Then even a ribbis payment is okay. But without introducing those exceptions, Rav is saying, yes, commerce is commerce, but I need you to be very exact so that you're not doing something that looks like ribbis.
One last question.
And you're arguing that point, but you're right. That is Rob's point. He very much.
But is the Mashiach that the borrower makes the Mashiach on the wheat, or is it that the I mean, the lender makes the
The
Mashiach
lender,
on the
the
wheat.
lender makes the Mashiach, now he owns it, so it doesn't matter what the price is, because it's
Oh,
his,
wait,
it's
the
his
lender
upside.
the lender owns it and he lends it. So I don't understand how he's making the Mashiach because he owns it already. The lender is lending
No,
it.
no, no, the lender doesn't own it. The lender is lending to the borrower who gives him the tavua as a
Security interest.
security interest, right? So once he gives him that security interest, and let's say there's Mashiach, then it's no longer a loan, it's a purchase, and therefore they can't be ribbis because he bought it. If it goes up in value, it's his value, not he's not making it on the back of the borrower, he's making it on his own because he bought it and he made a Mashiach. Or one of the other alternative ways of understanding Rav. But what you're circling and maybe having the difficulty with is why is Rav so inflexible that whatever might be considered a valid commercial transaction is not. And so therein lies the machlokes between Rav and Rav Yanai. Rav Yanai makes the point. What difference does it make if it's commodities or money? It's fungible, and that's your argument. But Rav says, no, I can't accept that because anything other than wheat for wheat appears to be ribbis.
Rabbi, one
Even
last
though you
question.
can argue until you're blue in the face, it's not. Unless there's an exception, which we've tried to make, Rob says there's ribbis. So what we now have is a very strict machlokes between Rav, who says anything that wheat for wheat is ribbis. Rav Yanai says no, wheat for another commodity or cash is not ribbis. And Rav not agreeing with the brisa. So we said that can't be. Rav's got to agree with the brisa because the brisa came before him. So we're saying, you know why Rav agrees with the brisa? Because according to one view, there was Mashiach. According to one view, there was Karen Zavius. According to another view, there was Rabbi Yehuda's theory. We're finding theories, loopholes, as it were, for Rav to climb through so that Rav's position can be softened because of that loophole. But for the loophole, he would not agree with Rabbi Oshia, but he's agreeing with Rabbi Oshia because the circumstances set up so that he can find a loophole why he shouldn't be strict. So what you keep coming back to is trying to understand why Rav is strict and Rav is inhibiting commerce. And Rav will say simply, no, commerce can go on, but these are the rules. The rules are it's got to be very, very exacting. Otherwise, it's a problem. And Rabbi Yanai says, no, that it's not a problem because we have latitude. We have latitude to be able to do other things that make the deal, that consummate the deal, even though it isn't strictly, let's say, wheat for wheat. So that's the whole machlokes.
Okay, one last question. Was this a machlokas amongst Tanoim before Rav brought this up?
Yeah, so Rav was in Amora. So
I know.
Rav
So
came
were there
after
any
all-
Tanoim who raised this machlokas?
No, because Rav Oshia's brisa is the brisa that everybody adheres to. So Rav Oshia established a brisa that everybody agreed to. So that now becomes the bellwether. Rav Oshia's brisa of how you can transact from wheat to wine to shemen to money is what everybody says is acceptable. So now when the Gemara comes along and he wants to argue in a very narrow way that you can't transact wheat for shemen, what do you mean? The brisa says you can do it. So Rav can't strictly say, I disagree with the brisa. So we, meaning the Gemara, the Amoraim say, you know what, Rav, you fit in anyway. Because even though you have a much more stringent view than what we're willing to accept, we find exceptions to allow you to concur with what Rav Oshia is saying in the brisa. And that's what this whole Gemara, the different views are, that there are loopholes from which you can sort of climb through, or a hook to hang your hat on, because what your view is still fits in with the view of the Brisa because, and the because is the different reasons, Mashiach, Karen Zavius, whatever it happens to be. So we want to
you,
reconcile.
Rabbi. I apologize to the Chevra.
At some point in time, Michael, we may say that Rav is irreconcilable. Let's not, I mean, we're not there yet. But let's see if at some point there is enough ammunition where the Gemara says, Rav, you're not right, period. You're not right because you're not comporting with what is the established view. And that happens everywhere. There are times when we try to reconcile different opinions, and at the end of the day, we can't reconcile. And we say, okay, this is the prevailing opinion, and your opinion is the minority opinion. We don't hold like you. You're entitled to your view, but you're not entitled that the halacha should be like you. So in this particular case, we're saying that it makes more sense that the halacha would be, let's say, like Rabbi Hyatt, who purports to say that Rav Oshia's brisa is totally fine, and Rav, we need to find loopholes to get him to comport. So the latest loophole that we said was Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that's where we are right now. The Gemara now wants to understand. Okay, so that's where we are. We sort of ended this right now. Now the Gemara wants to go on and say, wait a minute. Rav Yehuda gave us a chiddush that there's a difference. What? There's a difference between having alternate ways of concluding a deal or not. And in an alternate ways of concluding a deal, if one of the alternatives is ribis, it's not ribis because there was a way to do it without ribis. So Rabbi Yehuda is being extremely makel. He's saying that whenever you have different ways of paying, even though one is categorically ribis and you shouldn't do it, you're allowed to do it as long as there was another way to do it that wasn't ribis. That's an amazing theory. So the Gemara now wants to understand, where did Rabbi Yehuda get that from? Where did he come along and say such a chiddush in order to understand Rav? We're dealing with an alternate theory, an alternate universe. And once you have an alternate universe, then the universe of ribis is no longer ribis. I mean, that you got to have some support for because that's out there. So now the Gemara wants to continue here towards the bottom of Samach Gimel. Now that we've reestablished what our discussions are, we want to understand Rabbi Yehuda. Where does Rabbi Yehuda come along and say that as long as you have alternatives, it's not ribis? So here, let's take a look. The Tanya, right, the Brisa, a different Brisa, Harishahaya Noiseh. A person borrowed a mana, $100, let's say, from his friend, and he took his field that he owned, and he says, I'm going to give you this field as collateral, and you hold on to the field, and when I pay you back the $100, you'll transfer the field back to me. Now, the field is an active field, and it's producing peiros, producing fruit. Now, the specter of the fruit is a problem. Why? Maybe before we get into the Gemara, who can eat the fruit? Right? I mean, let's think about this a minute. If I lend you $100 and you give me, Michael, a field, and I'm in control of the field, and there's a whole field of peaches that are coming from that field, query, can I eat those peaches or not? I don't own the field. I have it as collateral. Does that look like ribis? Because I'm going to benefit from the loan by eating peaches, which are worth more at the end than the value of the loan. The loan is $100. If I eat the peaches, it's $10. I get $110 for $100. That's ribis. So this is now the Gemara trying to understand Rabbi Yehuda's theory, why Rabbi Yehuda says what he does. So, okay, so that's what we're going to talk about.
Rabbi, I just want to clarify this too. So there's a machlokas in Baba Kama, Baba Basra about whether ownership of the produce or the right to the produce is tantamount to ownership versus the ownership of the land, even though you don't have rights to the produce. In this situation, why can't they estimate this amount of produce in this example and say this is equivalent based on, the measurement of how much fruit there is to that number and agree that they have the right to that, those payros.
And then and reduce the amount of the loan.
And right.
That's 100% okay. That's 100% okay, because at the end of the day, $100 will be $100. Our problem is where I lend you 100 and you're going to repay me 100, and on top of the 100, you're going to have $10 worth of the fruit. So that $10 hangs out there as possible ribbis, because you're paying me back the 100. You're not paying me back 90.
Well, but wait a minute. The amount I give you to have that's measured, that we agree to the measurement, because we haven't actually counted the number of fruit on the trees, is we agree that it's equivalent, and you have the right to eat that fruit in exchange for paying back the loan. So that the value of that fruit may be different than what the actual loan was for, if we're talking chitim, because we're not talking about the same commodity. But even if we were, it's an estimation. So how is that not perceived? How is that perceived as legitimate when a trade for another commodity is not? It is another commodity.
Right. And therefore, let's just continue. Therefore, there will be this discussion of whether or not it's ribbis or not. In other words, yes, the answer to your question is yes. Depending on what the transaction agreed upon and what's being repaid, there might be ribbis or there might not be ribbis, because there are specific factors. So in this particular situation, they traded $100 and he gave him the mashkin. So, and then now the fruit starts growing. Says the brisa, that's a brisa, bisman shama ochel peiros mutter. If the seller, meaning the borrower, right? Because the seller of the field is the borrower in this situation. So if he's the one who comes in every day and picks and harvests the peaches, we don't have a problem, because it's his field. He didn't give up the field. It's a mashkin. Then no problem. There's no ribbis if the mocher, borrower, eats the fruit. But lokeach ochel peiros, according to this brisa, if the lender, meaning the buyer of the field, but we call him buyer, but he's the lender. If the lender eats the peiros, it's osir. Why? Because it looks like ribbis, because he is going to be eating the produce. And then at the end, he's going to get his $100 back. And when you get the $100 plus the produce, that's classical ribbis. Okay, so let's stop a minute. So that's the Tanakama of that brisa. Comes Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda says, Af bisman shalokeach ochel peiros, even if the lender eats the peiros, mutter, it's not considered ribbis. So Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on what seems to be the correct theory, that 100 plus 10 is ribbis. And he's saying, no, it's not ribbis. Why is it not ribbis? So here's what the reason is. Amalhem Rabbi Yehuda. So how can you do that, Rabbi Yehuda? It's ribbis. So Rabbi Yehuda says it's not ribbis. Why? Maser bebaisus ben zunin. Because I'm going to tell you a story about this individual, Baisis ben Zunin, also Sodeu Mecher, who made his field a collateral. Mecher made him collateral, exactly our situation. Al Pi Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and he did it according to the way Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, who was the Rosh Bezin, he did it exactly the way it was supposed to be. And the psak was Lokeach ochel peiros. And the buyer ate the peiros, and that seemed to be okay. So from here, Rabbi Yehuda says, I'm hanging my hat on what Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said, that there's no ribbis because the lokeach is allowed to eat the peiros. Amru lo, so the Chachamim, who are the Tanakama here, said to him, no, you're wrong. Mishum ra'oya, that's no raya. Why? You made a mistake, Rabbi Yehuda. Because in that situation of biases, It wasn't the Lokeach who ate the Paris, which would be legitimate because he's allowed to eat it. It was the Mocher. It was the lender who ate the Paris. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said it's okay. So if anything, the tables are turned and the lender may eat the Paris and there's no ribbis. So that's against Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda wants to say that it's okay for the Lekeach eat the ribbis because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said so. But the Chacham was saying you didn't hear correctly. You made a mistake in understanding the psak that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah wasn't talking about the Lokeach. He was talking about the Mocher, where the lender was eating the Paris. Okay. So that's the machlokes. So now we want to understand what is the machlokes between the Chacham and the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Having said that he made a mistake, that's sort of an ancillary issue, is that Rabbi Yehuda made a mistake. Okay, fine. We won't dwell on that. Strike the Gemara, Ma benayu. What's the underlying principle of the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim? Omar Abaya said, Tzad echod beribes ike benayu. This is where Rabbi Yehuda gets his shita from. Abaya says the machlokes is if there are two alternative ways of concluding a deal, which we said before, and one is a ribis conclusion, and one is a non-ribis conclusion, but there's an option to do either or. It's not fixed that this is the way you have to pay. I can pay you with trua, I can pay you with money. I have choices. So if there are choices, then Rabbi Yehuda takes the position that it's no longer a straight case of ribis, it's a case of possible ribis, and when there's in a transaction where there is possible ribis or possible no ribis, you can't hold him liable for ribis if he follows that particular track. So that's the chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda, according to this Gemara, where there was a machlokes between the Lokeach and the Mocher, and he thought that the Lokeach could eat it and it's not ribis. And they came back and said, no, you made a mistake. It was only when the Mocher. Why did he say that the Lokeach can eat it? He's saying the Lokeach can eat it because there is an alternative way of finishing the transaction on this loan, and the alternative allows him to eat ribis. That's a tremendous chiddush. And Rabbi Yehuda goes on the line here and says, when there are if the deal is hard and fast and it's ribis, no question it's ribis. But if the deal is not hard and fast, I can repay you amongst a couple of different ways, and one of those ways is ribis. We will not consider it ribis even if he does it because there was a different way of concluding. That's a big chiddush in Rabbi Yehuda, and that's Rabbi Yehuda's position, which is why he says that in the case of the creditor, it's okay for the Lokeach to eat it, even though he is the lender. But still, that deal could have ended in a way where there was no ribis. Right, and it could have ended that way, but didn't. It's still no ribis. That's a gewaltige chiddush. So the Gemara is trying to say that's the distinction in the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore that supports what we said before. According to Shmuel, one of the ways that Rab fits into Rav Oshia is because the situation allows for alternative payments, and Rav will agree. Yeah, when there's alternative payments, I agree there's no ribis, even if it's paid with an alternative method, which I don't hold up. I don't hold you can pay with alternatives, but because there is two ways of doing it, I'm going to concede to Rav Oshia's brisa. So, Michael, what we have is Rav still has a very stringent view, but we're finding different hooks for him to hang his ad on as to why our circumstance is not the traditional I lend you and you have to pay me. There are nuances to it. And here the nuance of Rabbi Yehuda is he could have done it that way. And once you can do it that way, it doesn't matter if you do it anymore. Because you can, that takes it out of ribbis. And remember, we're starting from a position where ribbis, we've got to find a way to soften ribbis, because ribbis is a real serious offense. So when you have Rabbi Yana, he says, no problem, you can it's fungible. But if Rob's going to say it's not fungible and you're constricted in what you can do, then you're almost always going to be over on ribbis if you don't follow the line all the way through. And you know what? That's a problem for us, because then we're too quick on the trigger to say there's ribbis. The Gemara wants to soften that on Rob and say, Rob, we're going to give you alternative ways where even you, who hold very strictly of ribbis, I'm going to give you ways to wiggle out and say, this is not ribbis. So in this particular machlokes between the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda, the whole basis of why the lender is allowed to eat the fruit, even though it looks like ribbis, because he's getting back the $100 and he's eating the fruit. And the answer is because there are alternatives. And once there are alternatives, and even you, Rav, who are in strict construction in the way you look at ribbis, you'll allow for some flexibility, and therefore there won't be ribbis. So that is the interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda's view. Now, there's one other interpretation that we should look at. There's a different interpretation on this particular occasion of the creditor. Rava Amar. Rava says different machlokes. Ribbis almanas lahachzer ikar benaya. The difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is a situation where I make a condition with you. I am going to take this fruit, i.e., it looks like ribbis, but it's conditional that if you repay me the loan, I'm going to return you the fruit. So in other words, Monday morning, we make a transaction. And the transaction is I lend you $100 and you give me a field. It's busting out with fruit. I'm going to eat some of the fruit. Appears to be ribbis. Says Rava, if you and I transacted this loan, allowing me to eat the fruit, which looks like ribbis, but we made an agreement that if, hopefully when, but if the loan is repaid, you're going to return the value of the fruit to me, so that there will not be ribbis. So here the question turns on, there appear to have been ribbis, and then there won't be ribbis. Does that take it out of the realm of ribbis? In other words, ribbis almanas lahachzer, does that equate to ribbis? Because in real time there was ribbis. In real time he ate the fruit, and that fruit had a value over and above the loan. Everybody who sees it will say, "Oh my gosh, he's going to get a benefit here." They don't understand or know the nuances of the deal. They don't know that it was almanas lahachzer. That, in other words, if the mashkin fell through, then he bought it. If he bought it, he's allowed to eat the fruit. I can eat the fruit of something I buy. But if it turns out that at the end of the day it was a loan because the loan was repaid, then all of that fruit that was eaten would be ribbis, except for the fact that I'm returning it back to you. So in other words, it was an instant pleasure because I ate the fruit, but long term I'll pay for it. So that's the machlokes.
Rabbi, that's a sham transaction. It's a sham transaction.
Say it again?
It's a sham transaction.
Well, not so much we don't know the end of that transaction. Is he going to have enough money to get his field back, or is he going to have to concede to a sale? That's not a sham. It's two people who are doing a transaction, but they don't know the outcome.
But you said, if I understood correctly, that he pays him the $100 back.
It's a loan. Oh, it's a loan. It's a loan.
I'm saying he pays the lender back $100 loan, and then the fruit is kind of ancillary. So he says, I'll pay you back the fruit, but I'm still going to pay you the money back. So
correct.
The fruit is a cover. I mean, it's really, what does it do? It just buys more time.
But in real time, let's say I'll pay you back in 6 months. the 6 months of the outstanding loan, the trees blossom and they have fruit. What to do with that fruit? So one alternative we gave was before. Okay. Now we're saying that, you know what the alternative is? What did the parties transact? What did they say in the deal? If they said in the deal that almanas lahachzir, that if you wind up repaying the $100 loan, then you're going to give me back all of the value of the fruit that you ate, and therefore there won't be ribbis. But if come 6 months from now, there is no repayment, then it's as if at the lemafreya, meaning at the very beginning, it was a sale, not a loan. And if it's a sale, then eating fruit from what you bought is not ribbis, because you'll be eating over that 6 months produce from a field that you bought 6 months ago, although we didn't know it. We only know it 6 months later that lemafreya, you bought that land.
But Rabbi,
if I buy land, I can eat my fruit all day long.
I'm sorry, the land is worth more than the fruit that he took. So
right,
it may be reverse ribbis, whereas the lender gets a worse deal. So the lender gets back land that is worth less or more than the amount that he loaned. So to me, the fruit is you've got collateral up, so it's like another loan. It's not the same transaction. It's like another loan because he's saying, I'm going to eat the fruit and I'm going to give you I'm going to put up the land. If you don't pay me back the fruit, then I'm going to lose the land. So how is that an extension of the original transaction?
No. Let me clarify. I lend you $100. You give me a collateral. Collateral is a field. If the field is barren, it'll sit there for months, and then we'll figure out 6 months from now when the loan is up whether or not I repay you, and then it's back to me, or if I don't repay you, you own it. Very simple, very straightforward. The complication comes when the field produces fruit, and the lender, you say, I want to go into the field and eat the fruit. So we establish a deal at the outset and say as follows: I'm going to let you eat the fruit, but if I pay you back the $100, you've got to give me back the value of the fruit. So I'm going to let you have the fruit right now. It shouldn't spoil. You should enjoy it. But it's contingent on whether we conclude the deal. If we conclude the deal that I give you back the $100 that I borrowed, and you ate $10 worth of fruit, you've got to reimburse me for the $10 because that would be ribbis. It's a loan. If, on the other hand, since it's contingent on my being able to pay you back, and come 6 months, I say to you, Michael, I cannot pay you back. Take my fee. And you say, okay, I'm good with that. And in the interim 6 months, you ate $10 worth of fruit. Whose fruit did you eat? Says the Gemara here, you ate your own fruit, not my fruit. You ate your fruit because it was a contingent deal at the outset that I'm eating the fruit, but I'm going to return it to you if the loan is repaid. But if the loan is not repaid, then it's as if we transacted a sale 6 months ago. 6 months ago, we transacted a sale, and you were eating your own fruit for 6 months. That says the Gemara is the circumstance of our situation.
Well, but that's different. It's a conditional sale, but you have the right to use the field in the interim. So I'm getting it. And the agreement is you pay me for the value of the fruit. Is the value of the fruit I pay you what it was when the deal was transacted, or whether is it the value of the fruit when I return the field?
No, whatever the whatever the value of the fruit was when you took it. If it was $1 a bushel and you ate 10 bushels, then it's $10. In other words, yeah, it's in real time. It's the value of what you.
So it's at the time the transaction is made.
Right.
I'm going to eat the fruit, and then I return you the fruit, and
Or the value of it later on.
value,
It's not
and the field,
so
or the value
according
of the
to
fruit
here's the
and
point.
field is
According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's definitely not ribis. According to the Chachamim, it's ribis. Why is it ribis? Because, and this is an interesting thing, at the time you took it, it was ribis because we didn't know the outcome of the transaction. Therefore, say the Chachamim, since at the time you took it, there was an uncertainty, so we could argue that you were taking ribis, fixing it later and repaying it doesn't take it out of the realm of ribis in real time. You understand? In other words, the Chachamim don't allow for a look back and say, we're going to look back, we're going to see what wound up happening, and depending on what wound up happening, he'll either repay it or not repay it. Say the Chachamim, that's fine, but in real time, it was ribis. In real time,
why? It's
everybody who
collateral.
looked at the transaction said, oh my gosh, Michael's eating ribis. He's taking fruit
But
from
wait a minute.
the field.
It wasn't sold at that point in time.
It was not.
So it's collateral for the loan at that point in time. So it's not
Right.
ribis at
With a
that point in time.
contingency as to whether or not it's repaid or not. It was collateral for a loan, and there was a contingency whether to repay it or not.
It's a matter, let's assume that it was an equal value at the time of the transaction. So what they want to do is make sure that they're equivalent values. So this is contingent. If this is collateral, if I don't pay, just like any other piece of collateral. And so therefore, if I'm going to forfeit the collateral if I don't return the loan. That's not the parties agree to what that value is. If it's
but that forfeit will become a sale, not a loan.
Correct, but it's not a sale at the point. That's why I don't understand why it's ribis. It is just ensuring that payment is made. A transaction has not been made at the time of the deal.
But no, you're right. But that's exactly the machlokes. According to
why is that ribis? Because it could be less or it could be more at the time.
And that's Rabbi Yehuda's view. But according to the Chachamim, that 6-month period, because of the uncertainty, gives rise to the concern of ribis, and then you can't undo it later.
But Rabbi, that's true of any collateral that you give at the time of a loan. It's what you think it is as of that point in time, and it could be worth more, it could be worth less. And I don't understand why that collateral is different than any other collateral.
Because in that collateral, if you don't make a contingency, that's one thing. But if you make a contingency, in the first case that we had, where he gave him the collateral and he ate it, then there's a machlokes whether or not the seller, meaning the borrower, can eat or cannot eat, because there was nothing was specified. So now Rava is saying, no, there's a different situation here to understand the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Why Rabbi Yehuda is mekel and the Chachamim are not mekel is the question of, once something appears to be ribis, can you undo it later and say it's not ribis? And what's the problem? Because at the time that he ate the fruit, that you ate the fruit, the deal was still a loan. And everybody knew that I had lent you, or you had lent me $100. Why is Michael eating fruit that appears to be ribis? Only later did we realize that was never a loan. It was a sale because I couldn't repay you. So therefore,
it was a security interest.
From the beginning, it's considered a sale, and you ate your own fruit.
Wait a minute. The sale did not occur then. So to make it not ribis, you have to pay back the fruit. So if you, in effect, if there's a default on the loan and you take possession, you should still have to pay for the fruit because at that point it was not a sale, it was not your property. It cannot revert backwards. So
And that's exactly the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Can you revert back or not? Rabbi Yehuda
but
says you could.
I thought we said that we could not have future transactions, that the halacha doesn't represent future sales.
No, Rabbi Yehuda is saying that in the course of commerce, you and I can specifically agree. We can set forth a contract, and we have this in the real world. I'm sure you're familiar with contingent deals all the time,
Of course.
where there's a
But
contingency
that's why I
based
couldn't
on
understand.
something.
Yeah.
Now, the real world isn't worried about ribbis. We're worried about ribbis. But if a deal is contingent and then all of the investigation proves that the merits of the deal don't work, each party goes home. No problem.
But for the halacha, for the Tanna Kama to say that this is a retroactive sale is not true. Until he defaults, it is not a sale. So at that point, it's collateral, and he's using the other party's produce.
Oh, okay, I understand where you're coming from. So your concern is that when we say that it was a sale, you're saying it wasn't a sale, it was a default, because you're using a different term, and you're saying it was a default, and therefore it should still be ribbis.
Correct.
So that's what we're trying to get through here, is that even the Chachamim aren't going to use the term default.
But it's a matter of when the sale takes place.
They're going to say it's a contingent sale.
If it's collateral, so this wasn't a contingent sale. This was a collateral default. It was not a sale. It was you defaulted on the loan, and it's not a sale of the property.
Yeah,
that's the distinction I want to make.
Yeah, I fully understand your concern in the terminology that it was a default on a sale, not a contingent sale.
No, it was a default, not on a sale, on a loan.
On a loan.
It was a default on a loan, and if I don't pay you back, you get my field.
Okay, but let's say you and I took out a shtar, and we specified the wording of the shtar is the following. You, Michael, are lending me $100. That $100, I'm giving you a mashkin of a field. It's in the shtar. Now, the mashkin of that field has produce. Who's going to eat the produce? We agree.
Wait, I want to understand what you mean by a mashkin. Is it
the mashkin means collateral.
Deposit?
Mashkin means collateral. Collateral.
Right. So it's a security deposit. Right.
Security deposit. Right. That's a mashkin.
Right.
All right.
And
now,
so I'm entitled to hold that as security.
It's all set forth. There's no language in the contract about a default. So take the word default out of our discussion for the time being, and saying there was no default. There's no issue of default. It's clearly the following. Either in 6 months, I repay you $100 and I get my field back, or I don't pay you and you own the field retroactively from the date that you gave me the $100.
But not retroactively, because
that's the condition. So that's the problem, Michael. That's the condition of the contract. I understand, but the condition of the contract said that it's going to be.
If it's retroactive, then you've built in ribbis to the transaction.
Right.
Because
you got it. Therefore, the Chachamim say it's built in ribbis. It's built in ribbis. And Rabbi Yehuda says it's no ribbis because either you ate because you're going to return it to me or not return it, depending on whether you own it. If you don't own it, you're going to give me back $10 worth of fruit.
That is
if you
definitely
own it,
not a contingent.
You owned it from day one, because that's the language of the agreement, that you own it lemafreya from the date that we transacted. So you're saying it's a default on a loan, and what the Gemara is saying is it's a contingent contract that will allow you to have owned it, not because you defaulted on the loan, because we agreed that the loan would not be repaid, Possibly, and therefore that possibility means that you own it. Now, you know what? It's semantics to a degree.
Well, no, it's not semantics, but I want to let's change the transaction to a contingent sale. I am going to borrow $100. I'm going to pay you $100, and
You're gonna lend me.
It's
You're gonna lend me 100.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna lend you $100. You have two options. It's a 6-month loan. You can either take possession retroactively at the time of the actual loan if I don't pay you back the amount in 6 months, or you can pay me back that amount. Now, that is a contingent sale because you have an option to buy retroactively, and it's not collateral because at that point, those are my two alternatives. So during the period until the sale is consummated, if I take the produce, that's ribis in a contingent sale transaction because it does, until I execute my option, it's yours.
Yeah. So
I just want to make sure that the terminology, because as a loan, it's, you don't have the right. As a contingent sale, if it's contingent, you can exercise in the next 6 months.
So the language of the contract would say, you're lending me $100. I am giving you a collateral that is contingent on whether I repay you the $100 in 6 months. If I repay you the $100 in 6 months, then this would be considered collateral, and therefore any produce that is taken from the field has to be repaid because there shouldn't be interest. If, however, the transaction winds up being a sale, because at this point I don't know if I'm going to repay the $100, then says the Chachamim, you're not, in other words, what you ate improperly.
You should have to pay for that.
What you ate was yours, lemafreya.
No, it wasn't.
Because we don't know if the sale was a sale.
Until you accept the offer, until you make a decision, it's up in the air. So let me ask you a question. If the field was worth $200, the field was worth $200 and you made $100, would that transaction not be outright ribis because you could make a gain on the loan and contingent? If I don't pay the loan, then you get this for $200. Is that not ribis?
Right. So here's the nub of the issue is that according to the Chachamim, since in real time we don't know what the end result will be, will it be a transaction or a loan? We don't know it. Say the Chachamim, because we don't know it, there's a prohibition for the lender to take the fruit and eat it, because that would be a contingency which he might have to repay. And therein lies the Chachamim's view that Marasign, whatever you want to call it.
But if he agrees to pay for the fruit as part of this,
no, he doesn't agree. No, he does not agree to pay for.
Well, then he should have no right to take the payros as its collateral until
Rabbi Yehuda says he does have the right.
But I disagree with Rabbi Yehuda in this case.
But Rabbi Yehuda is definitely Mako, and he's saying because we don't know the end result of the deal, what happens during the deal is all fungible. It can be returned. The Chachamim say once paid, it's like Rob. Once paid, the deal is done, and therefore you can't undo it because you've already done it. Rabbi Yehuda says no, you can undo the deal because the deal is only final 6 months from now, And because it's final 6 months from now, we don't know if what you're eating is ribis or not. Therefore, we're going to allow you the flexibility of repayment. That's the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim according to Rava.
Wow.
And therefore, he says, Rabbi Yehuda's view is, remember, Rabbi Yehuda had different interpretations of his view. He was very makel. He even, I mean, the view of Rabbi Yehuda was that you could collect outright ribis if there was a source of repayment that wasn't ribis. That's mind-boggling.
But that would say that the sale is now. That would take the position that we're defaulting to the fact that you're not going to pay the loan. And the essence of the transaction is that it's a loan, not a sale.
Right.
So,
Well,
so to have it dated retroactively is smoke and mirrors. It's a sale. Under Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation, it's a sale
would it
now.
be more satisfactory, Michael, if the language in the contract was explicit and it said, you're giving me $100 as a loan, I am giving you collateral of a field, and now this is at the very beginning of the transaction.
Right.
If in 6 months you repay me, I give you back the land. If you don't repay me, then I own the land from day one. That's explicitly the
But
language.
it doesn't cover everything. The fruit that was grown and eaten. So in that transaction, the contingent buyer has no rights to the fruit.
You mean the lender?
No, I'm sorry. The contingent. Yes, the contingent lender. I'm sorry.
Why does the lender not have a right to the fruit?
No rights to the fruit.
Why does he not have a right?
Because it's not a sale. It's a contingent sale.
But we don't know that. We don't know it.
Well, we don't know it because the sale hasn't occurred yet. Until the sale occurs,
right.
that he has to agree to pay for the fruit. He may say, I'm going to pay, I'm going to make this decision early and I'll get to eat the fruit. And so therefore, I'm not going to wait the 6 months. I'm going to default on the loan in my parlance, and I'm going to take the land I'm going to forfeit the land in return for that. And
so what we have here is a situation not unlike Rav's situation, where Rav is so machmir on ribis that he doesn't want to, he has tunnel vision on ribis, and the Chachamim here are really echoing Rav's shita, saying that something that appears to be ribis can never be undone, because even though he's eating fruit today on a loan, which looks like ribis, what happens if the loan turns out to be repaid and the lender repays him the value of the fruit? Says the Chachamim, that's fine, but you can't undo what was already done. And what was done is a loan between you and I, allowed for someone to eat the fruit, which would have been ribis clearly.
Rabbi, that transaction should not be allowed as a result of ribis.
So
because the appearance of ribis occurs, that transaction should not be allowed.
Right, and the Chachamim say that it's not allowed. Correct, not allowed. Rabbi Yehuda says it's allowed because contingencies can be undone. In other words, what appears to be ribis can be pulled back later, depending on the outcome of the deal. So Rabbi Yehuda again is mekel, and the Chachamim, who are very machmir, say something that might look like ribis on day one can never be wiped out on day 180 when the deal is clarified. And even if I pay you back, but it already appeared to be ribis on day one. In other words, they're very unforgiving, that when something looks like ribis and later turns out not to be ribis, tough luck.
But see, in this situation, I understand it because, again, it's collateral. The price, the value of the property changes based on the timing of the produce. So if I get another harvest in and it's harvest time, then the value changes because it may not be that market a
Yeah,
change.
but in this scenario, no, Michael, in this scenario, we're not concerned with evaluations, whether it's
But you have
more
to be.
valuable or less valuable.
have to
That
be.
is
The
not
question
our
is-
issue here. Our
So
issue
The
here is
collateral has to, if the collateral is less or more than the loan, you have a problem. And so you have to establish the collateral value. And if it's more, it's got to specify that you're only entitled to this amount. And if you're pricing the value of a property before a harvest, it's going to be slightly more than after a harvest.
right. But if we agreed that even slightly more, if it turns out to be a loan and not a sale, I'm going to pay you back. This is the part I think maybe that we have to focus on. I'm going to pay you back. I'm only eating the fruit in the interim while we wait to see how the deal shakes out.
Right, but Rabbi
So-
Yehuda is assuming that this is a sale from the outset.
That's
The only
correct.
way you can read it. So it's a sale that already,
And the
so
Chachamim
the
say that-
value matters.
Yeah, and the Chachamim say it doesn't matter whether it's retroactive at the outset or not. We just look at the produce in real time, and if in real time there is the chashash, the suspicion that he ate the fruit, which someone looking and understanding the deal would say, this is ribis. He's eating fruit on a loan of $100, and he's
Right.
going to wind up more. He may not understand the nuance of, wait a minute, if it turns out to be repayment of the loan, then the lender is going to repay him every shekel of that fruit. So, but that's not good enough according to the Chachamim, because in real time, we didn't know if it was a sale or not, or a loan, and you ate fruit that looks like ribis.
But I thought you said, Rabbi, I thought you said that if he agreed to pay for the value of the fruit in
No, there was no payment to the value of the fruit. He just ate the fruit gratis, and it would be his fruit if the deal turned out to be a sale, and it would not be his fruit if it turned out to be a loan, but he'd repay the fruit.
It's a matter of when the sale is effectuated. If he defaulted beforehand, then the sale is, quote unquote, sale is consummated. I mean, the seizure of the land is beforehand. So if he decides to do that, but if he doesn't default until after, it should be with nothing stated that the lender has no right to that fruit.
Okay. Again, I think the focal point of this machlokes, Michael, is in real time when someone eats fruit that may or may not be viewed as ribis later.
In real
Can
time, it's ribis
you-
because
can
the
you eat
sale
that
has
fruit?
not been consummated. It's
Sorry?
ribis, it's ribis in real time because the sale has not been consummated.
Right.
It's not really a sale, it's a default. Again,
Right. According to the Chachamim, it's ribis in real time.
Right.
And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not necessarily ribis in real time because you can repay and take it out of ribis. The Chachamim say, once you say the word ribis, you can never undo what
understand.
that situation is. That's the essence of this machlokes. And that is why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's another understanding, according to Rava's view, it's an understanding of why Rabbi Yehuda is makel. Because Rabbi Yehuda is very makel in all these situations, and we're finding reasons why. So Abaye gave a reason, and that was fine. Now Rava is saying a reason because you know why he's makel? Because you can always undo what you've done. And the Chachamim say, no, you can't undo what you've done. Once you've done something, even though the contract allows for repayment, you have already collected ribis in real time. You can't wipe that out with an eraser and say, oh, no, it wasn't ribis because the sale transaction, the mafreya, he repaid. So that's really the nub of the argument is when you do something in real time, are you already over the lav, regardless of what happens later? According to the Chachamim, you're over the lav, and therefore it's a problem. Well, Rabbi Yehuda, you're not over the lav because you can repair it later by repaying. So That's the essence of the machlokes. So,
But Rob is at one extreme, Rabbi Yehuda is the other extreme, and the fact is they're both outside. The answer may lie within the two extremes.
yeah, but think about it at the time of the Gemara when people were transacting and doing business and wanted to, commerce is commerce. And so let's make a deal. They sat down, they spelled out the deal in so many ways, and as we've been talking about. And it turns out that notwithstanding the very specifics of the deal, the Chachamim say you can't make this deal because this deal will appear to be ribis, even if later it isn't. And once it appears to be ribis, it can never be wiped out. Rabbi Yehuda says, of course it can be wiped out. If the whole thing is contingent on what happens later, then it's whatever happens in real time isn't a reality until later. The Chachamim say, what do you mean isn't a reality? The reality is that you ate fruit from a loan that looks like ribis. So, and again, this now is the function of how strictly you construct the halacha, and the Chachamim similar to. By the way, Rav holds like the Chachamim. So the Rav and the Chachamim are on one side of the page, and Rabbi Yehuda is on the other side of the page, and he says, no, your strict construction of the tax don't allow, like you said before, don't allow for commerce. How are people going to have commerce if they want to make contingent deals or this, that? It seems like you're constricted to make any business because you might violate, or you will violate the halacha of ribis. So Rabbi Yehuda says, no, that can't be.
But Rabbi, we talked before, you said that there weren't any future transactions, that we couldn't have future transactions. This is a contingent transaction where you're going retroactively.
Yes.
And,
they
were not that sophisticated that they did this kind of transaction.
No, they did. They absolutely did. And if you held like the Chachamim, you wouldn't be able to make this deal. You can't make a deal that potentially is ribis, even if it gets undone. Rabbi Yehuda says you could.
So is that the halacha that if it appears ribis, you can't undo it, and you can't?
That's the Chachamim and Rab's view, that if it appears to be ribis, you can never undo it. That's what this Gemara is telling us.
And that's the halacha, Rabbi?
No, that's not the halacha. It's not the halacha, but it's a firm view on the part of Rav and the Chachamim is that otherwise ribis becomes a stranglehold on every transaction. Every transaction, if you don't dot the I exactly, in other words, basically on a transaction like this, the lender can never eat the fruit. He can never eat the fruit, so it should never appear to be ribis, even if later it isn't. So he's got to only the borrower can eat the fruit, which is what the Chachamim said in the beginning. The Chachamim said in the beginning only the buyer hamocha okol peiros, but the lokeach can't eat peiros. Comes Rabbi Yehuda and says the lokeach can eat peiros. How can the lokeach eat peiros? Because in this particular case, it's a contingency situation. He can eat the peiros, and if some reason later on the deal falls through and it's a sale, then fine, or you can repay the peiros. So the whole it's consistent is that the Chachamim and Rav are of one mind that everything has to be done strictly in real time without any deviation. If you have a deviation, even if later it's fixed, that fix is too late. The fix is too late because you already transacted a deal that smacked of ribis. And that says Rav and the Chachamim, we can't have. Rabbi Yehuda, like Rav Yanai, very, very, more liberal, that we know we're going to be able to fix things later. So why not allow things to happen which can be fixed later? As long as it can be fixed, we're not set in our ways. And that's basically our halacha in real time. Today, our halacha gives us the latitude to do things that can be undone or can be fixed or can be, transacted. All because we don't want to constrict commerce and say, two people who are Jewish people cannot enter into a deal. It's too complicated. And so the answer is that, Rabbi Yehuda says no, and ultimately that's the halacha, is that you can carve out these circumstances where something might appear to be ribbis, but isn't. And that's Rabbi Yehuda. That's Rabbi Yehuda all the way through. What might be ribbis isn't ribbis if you fix it later. Doesn't have to be fixed today in the front end of the deal. It just has to be fixed at the end of the deal. Now, someone looking at the deal might be puzzled what's going on here, because he won't know there was a conclusion that took it out of ribbis. But we're saying here that our situation is always when people are knowledgeable of what's going on. And clearly, if you only know part of the deal, then you're gonna, you'll think it's ribbis. But we're talking about making a whole deal that someone understands the beginning, the middle, and the end, and they'll see there's no ribbis. And that's the halacha. That's the halacha.
That's
All right, so very spirited, and Michael, I understand how, but you're espousing the shita of the Chachamim and Rav, that everything is strictly mapped out, and there can be no deviation as to whether or not you can undo or make a deal that isn't so clearly and purely a non-ribbis situation. Rabbi Yehuda allows for that flexibility as long as there are contingencies on how you can fix something if later it becomes problematic in ribbis. Rabbi Yehuda says you can fix it, and the halacha allows us to fix it and not worry about the fact that we did something at the beginning of the transaction that already was categorically ribbis without any kind of repeal. So that's how.
Thank you.